Okay, surprise! We were a little bit early here. We didn't necessarily expect these regional rankings to drop earlier than 3 o'clock, and lo and behold, my partner in crime, James Baker, hit me up and said at 11:59 a.m. or so, "Hey, regional rankings are released." And I'm like, expletive deleted.
Guess what?
So, folks, for those watching this live, understand, or on recording as a standalone show, this will be later integrated into Host Chat, which will be released later today. We decided to kind of integrate it instead of giving you in the huddle fatigue, which is a very big disease across the country from what we understand, especially in the East region. Yeah, exactly. JB, the subtitle below kind of gives a little bit of a hint here of what's going on. 2 losses. Ain't nobody got time for that.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
No.
It's
worse than bronchitis, I heard. So we're going to let's bring in a friend of ours here, chief bracketologist from D3Football.com, Greg Thomas. Wally Wabash himself, folks, well, or at least in name. I would love to see you in the outfit sometime, Greg, the Wally Wabash outfit.
The outfit? Oh, I have to get back to Crawfordsville. Maybe they would let me in the outfit. I don't know. I don't know. I think the outfit is probably less comfortable than it looks.
At least it's not the Dutchman. You ever see the Dutch? My graduating class, not to bore everybody, but my graduating class gave the mascot to the school, and we look back at that, and that was just a horrible idea because it's a really bad blonde Dutchman. I can't even explain it to you, but Dutch, I would never wear that. I'll put it that way to you. So let's talk rankings instead of mascots. Greg, Greg, you and I have been talking, so has JB and I this week about what we thought these would look like. We're going to walk through it step by step, but without giving away anything here, as we're going to go step by step. What's your overarching view of what these look like?
They look very they look like rankings that are missing data, to be honest. And I think we know from previous conversations that the first rankings don't completely factor in ranked results, results against other ranked opponents. And so what we have are rankings that look like they're really heavily weighted with win percentage, occasionally head-to-head results. And in some cases, strength of schedule seems to be a factor in sorting through one-loss teams or undefeated teams in some cases, and in some cases not. There's some curious inclusions this week, I'll say, at the tail end of some of the rankings.
Well, I know you know this stuff better than me, Greg, but even from a more of a layman, where I'm coming from, it does seem like, compared to prior years, that the strength of schedule part of the criteria, at least in this group, seems like it's a little less weighted than it's been in the past. And maybe that was intentional, maybe not. Maybe it's just a kind of coincidence. I mean, there's a lot of the usual suspects. I mean, when Frank and I were looking at kind of our own mock, like the top order didn't surprise us really, but really it's the bottom half of some of these where it's kind of like, well, where did that come from?
Calling a timeout. Let's go through them because we're kind of talking in parables to our friends that might not have seen them yet. And we're going to put them up on the screen here very slowly and deliberately. And we'll talk through them because some of the font gets too small for, I would say, the upper right window that we've used in the past. We will keep it in the big screen and then bounce back and forth out of it. So that's why we're doing it this way. Number 1, Salisbury at 7-0. SOS is 509. And what we're going to look at here is their Week 8 and Week 9 versus regionally ranked opponents. Backward looking to last week's, what we think the rankings look like, and then forward looking to this week where the rankings actually landed. And so when we do this, Salisbury ends up with a 1-0 and then a 2-0 because Wisconsin Oshkosh got ranked 9th, I think it was, out in the West region. So they added a regionally ranked opponent. Oshkosh was not ranked after their loss a couple of weeks ago. So their remaining schedule, not strong. TCNJ and William Patterson coming up. I don't think we're surprised by this, Greg. Are we? That Salisbury's still number one here?
No, I think last week maybe we were looking at the potential for Ithaca with their strength of schedule number and a potential win against Union, who is a ranked team and would have been a ranked team regardless of that result. I think we were looking at Ithaca possibly being a team that could go over Salisbury to the number one spot this week in the first rankings, but Ithaca did not win. So Ithaca lost, Cortland also lost, and that sort of left Salisbury as the lone Power League undefeated team out there in the East region.
Now, there are two other undefeated teams in Division III opponents in the East left after what happened last weekend. A little bit of carnage, obviously, in the rest of the East occurred. I think we entered the week with 6 undefeated teams, left it with 3, if memory serves. So let's see where they are. Do they jump teams like Wesley here, like Union? Did they jump anyone? Let's see what happens here as we continue to number 2. Wesley is remaining at the number 2 slot that we had predicted last week with that strong 577 strength of schedule. 2-1 and 1-1 because Endicott, which we think was a ranked team last week, drops out of the list. A little hint going on there. Their remaining opponents versus Kane and versus CNU, that 577 is going to be dropping over the next couple of weeks, Greg. I think that's pretty clear to us and probably precipitously. One of the things we want to capture here is a little bit of the forward-looking scenario as to what's going to happen in a couple weeks when, if these teams win out, everybody wins out to the degree that's possible, what will happen to their strength of schedule? So that's why we're including the remaining schedule. It's going to drop way off, and JB, you're going to give a little detail about Kane and CNU, I think.
Yeah, combined 5 and 11 between those two squads. I don't know how that translates from the SOS formula to how much it's going to drop it down. The one thing that could become interesting, Greg, is that with Ithaca having to play 2 games against teams with a combined 12 and 4 record, their strength of schedule is definitely going up, and they could actually jump Wesley in the strength of schedule. We did get a question on Twitter as well, what happens there? I don't know. I mean, the fact that Wesley's starting out at number 2 is clearly has them pretty high up in the board. But if that number starts to drop, and/or if they don't look great in the wins against Kane and William Patterson, I don't know. I mean, if there's only going to be one Pool C, it might come down to Wesley and Ithaca.
It may, and I think today's rankings are sort of good news, bad news for Wesley. I think it's nice to be ranked number 2 and have that position as the top ranked at-large team. But if you look at, we're one day after Election Day. If you look at results still left to come in for Wesley, their strength of schedule is certainly at a high water mark. It was also not good news for Wesley that Endicott fell out of the rankings. We thought Endicott was probably a ranked team last week, maybe could have been this week. I know when I did my number crunching earlier this week, I had Endicott in the 10 spot in the East region. So a little surprised that they weren't there, but that's bad news for Wesley because that's a ranked win for them, which is super valuable.
I want to bring up one thing. The NJAC has a very poor, or will ultimately have a very poor opponents winning percentage. And what that essentially boils down to is this. If your conference's non-conference games record was low, your OOWP suffers because of it ultimately. Even if you beat your non-conference opponents, everybody else needs to contribute to it. So conferences like the Liberty League and the Empire 8 that had a very good non-conference outing will do well ultimately. Their strength of schedules will eventually go up even if they are playing weaker opponents and they're out of conference games. The NJAC, on the other hand, is not in that shape. Yes, Wesley played Del Val as an out-of-conference opponent, and we'll see that actually coming up. Let's take the mystery away here and put Del Val up as number 3. But the conference's non-conference record is not going to help Wesley, and it ultimately may not help Salisbury, but I have a better feeling about Salisbury staying up at number 1 than I do it's Wesley staying up at number 2 for the reasons that we discussed earlier. Del Val with that quadruple overtime loss against Wesley, is basically being paired up with Wesley. We have not seen separation yet between these two teams. If a team jumps one, they may have to jump both simultaneously because they're viewed as tied teams, I think, based on that result. A 536 strength of schedule, 0-1, 1-1 because a team got added, we'll talk about in a little bit. Remaining schedule, they're playing that bye team. I like their chances against bye. And then I don't know. Yeah, they are. And versus Widener coming up on week 11. So Del Valle has one game left. Their strength of schedule will lock in probably near 536, probably closer to 525 if I had to guess when it's all said and done. But we'll see how it shakes out. The strength of schedule will change, don't forget, this week, despite them not playing a game, because the teams they've already played will contribute differently to their strength of schedule this week. Wesley, Del Valle, are they permanently paired, do you think, Greg, as long as they win?
They are. I mean, man, when I did my analysis this week, I did not pair them directly. I think
you and me both.
I think it's unfair to the other teams in the region to link Wesley and Del Valle inextricably because they went to a 4 overtime game. There are, to this point, 7 or 8 other games that have been played. There's a lot more data involved. I don't know that those teams have to be linked together in eternity because of the one game. It becomes difficult to compare, say, Western New England to Wesley and Del Valle instead of just one or the other, or in this case, Delaware Valley.
So I want to cut you off. I want to cut you off for 1 second. People are going to wonder here, Western New England fans, if they haven't seen this already, if they are next on the list, because they have a pretty good strength of schedule when you get down to it. So let's see what did come up next on this list. And it's Union. 487 strength of schedule. 1-0, 1-0. This would indicate that either Ithaca or Hobart probably is a ranked team, and probably Ithaca if you had to guess here, and not Hobart ultimately with that 2-loss scenario we talked about earlier. I'm also going to put on the screen number 5, Western New England with a 532 strength of schedule. You cannot use the Stetson game against this team, and if the committee's doing that, they should be admonished for that because you can't do it. It's an FCS team that's actually a good FCS team, Stetson. They are a 7-0 team for all intents and purposes, but the Endicott result dropping off hurt them at some point here because now they're 0-0 versus regionally ranked opponents. The 1-0 means that Endicott was probably ranked last week is what we're showing there. So 487 is trumping 532 because of the regionally ranked opponent scenario. Greg, do you agree with it? And can it permanently last like this?
I do agree with it. I think that Union's strength of schedule suffers because they played Anna Maria and Westfield State. And in the absence of any other results or data, that strength of schedule should count against Union. But Union has gone through the Liberty League, which we've already discussed has been a strong league. Their out-of-conference results were all very good. They've defeated Hobart. They've defeated Ithaca. I think they've validated their quality as a team with their play through the Liberty League. And so I think it's okay to have Union ahead of Western New England. What I'm looking forward to is where Union goes when they add games against Utica and RPI down the stretch.
JB, I'm going to let you take through the rest as I'm having a little sound issue on my end, but I know you can hear Greg still. So as we go through, we're going to go up to number 6 at this point in one moment. And that's going to be the following team, Ithaca. And also we'll put up number 7, Brockport. And this is interesting because without Hobart in the mix, you could maybe justify Brockport going over Ithaca with the records and the recentness of the loss and whatnot. But in this situation, they chose to go Ithaca, then Brockport here. Guys, go ahead and talk about that.
Yeah, I guess, Greg. I mean, how surprised were you to not see Hobart in this sort of, what I'll say the 7 space? Given I think they have the 5th highest strength of schedule in Division III right now. Certainly, they lost to Ithaca. They lost to Union. But at the same time, in the past, when we've seen teams with 600 plus strength of schedules, and we see it in a couple of other regions. I think actually, if you look, if you look down the north, you have Wash U and your own alma mater Wabash in there. You've got Birmingham Southern and Hardin Simmons in the south. You got Oshkosh in the west. So there are a couple of 6-2 teams out there. Why do you think it was that Hobart got left off, and especially given the fact that they do have that head-to-head win over what appears to be number 7 Brockport?
Hobart being left off is a bit of a head scratcher for me this week, particularly given other results from last week, Endicott losing in particular. We haven't quite got down to the end yet with the teams that are in instead of Hobart. But it is difficult to see Hobart with a strength of schedule that is 150 or almost 200 points higher than some other teams that were included in these rankings, with a win against a ranked opponent and a couple of other results against a couple of losses against ranked opponents. I mean, Hobart's profile for being ranked is very good, if not for being an at-large invitation candidate. Certainly, they present in the criteria like a team that could be ranked in the top 10. As it relates to Hobart in the Ithaca-Brockport scenario, Hobart is a common opponent. Ithaca beat Hobart. Brockport lost to Hobart. So that order with that data makes sense.
That's right. Okay.
So we're going to go at this point to number 8, it looks like, and it is going to be Cortland. Brockport beating Cortland, obviously. Not much discussion you need to do there. So let's kind of look at what comes up next as well. And that is, well, what is this doing here? WPI, a team that lost last week, is sticking there at number 9. And number 10 is Wilkes. But do you notice the common bond going on here at everything from 6 to 10? It's win-loss record. 7-1, 7-1, 7-1, 7-1, 7-1. Looks like this was done on purpose. 457 strength of schedule. 437 strength of schedule is atrocious at this phase of the season. And the regionally ranked opponent situation doesn't make it any better for Wilkes, especially having lost to Delaware Valley and WPI having no result. Greg, I'm going to pull up here one more thing before we go into some last conversation about this. This is the teams that were considered besides these teams. We believe there were 5 other teams that were at least in the conversation. Hobart at 6-2 with a 623 strength of schedule. Stevenson 6-2 with a 511. Endicott 6-2, 523. Framingham State 6-2, 586. Although a loss to Brockport, don't forget. MIT 5-2, 483. But Hobart and Stevenson, who has a out-of-region regionally ranked opponent in Bridgewater, and Hobart with games against Brockport, which they won, and Union, which they lost, and Ithaca, which they lost. So they have 3 regionally ranked opponents. They've got to be sitting there saying, what in the heck is going on here? Maybe we're not going to be in Pool C consideration. We get it, but shouldn't we be honored in some way, shape, or form with this record and the strength of schedule? What would you say to those teams, and what do you think about 9 and 10?
Those are probably the 2 biggest surprises in all of the rankings, not just the East region, but maybe all of the rankings. There's one other kind of weird one out there in the West, but those strengths of schedule, what was it? 457 and 437 in a group of teams that have just one more loss than those teams, groups of teams that have multiple results against ranked opponents and strengths of schedule that are over 100 points stronger. It's curious to see those teams ranked ahead of even two-loss teams that have built a stronger foundation in the primary criteria. Win percentage is a criteria, but also, the quality of your opponents and results against other quality opponents have to matter. And those are also built into the criteria, and they just seem to have not been factored in this week.
JB, what are you thinking on this one?
I think, the WPI one, if they had won against MIT, even if it was an OT and they ended up 8-0, it would make a lot of sense for them to pop into this list. Maybe, below Brockport still, but with the combination of the loss and some of the other criteria is just a bit of a head scratcher there, especially when you consider kind of in the past how the committee has looked at these teams. I mean, the Wilkes thing is interesting in the sense that, their only loss is to Del Val, but like you said, there isn't a lot of other, kind of crossover going on there. There's certainly way more crossover with a team like a Hobart, and then I guess even to a certain extent with Endicott, whose 2 losses are to number 2 and number 5. They really gave Wesley a close call, but then again they lost to Western New England. So it's interesting, especially when it comes down to when you're thinking about, let's say that Pool C does ultimately come down in the East region between Ithaca and Wesley. The absence of Endicott is a problem for Wesley, and it would be kind of a shame that they could get potentially passed over, I suppose. But at least for now, being in that number 2 position gives them a little bit of security. But their statistics, like the strength of schedule, is going to drop. They will end up with the same record potentially as either Ithaca or Cortland. Whoever finishes that Cortica game 9-1 will likely get some pretty serious consideration from the committee. But the chances of the East region getting in 2 Pool Cs in this, with only 5 to go around, it's really hard to see. I know, Greg, you have a bet, maybe, and you, Frank, as a top 25 voter, have a better view on some of those other C teams out there in the North and the South and the West. But it just seems statistically the likelihood of the East being the region that gets in 2 at-large candidates seems kind of low to me, but I guess we'll see.
Now you can hear me. All right, as I was saying, a lot's going to play out coming up in the next few weeks, and we're going to have to look at teams or conferences that have 0 or 1 losses, or both 0 or 1 loss teams, multiple of them right now. And there may be 2 loss teams that do get a look, a team with an extremely strong strength of schedule and a decent regionally ranked opponent number. But right now, it looks like that the committee, at least nationally, is trying to use win-loss as a primary indicator more than strength of schedule. So I think we're going to be stuck the way they're acting right now with one loss teams as the potential Pool C candidates across the board until we run out of them, if we run out of them at all. Do you agree, disagree? Do you think the East has a chance for 2 Pool C teams? Where are we on that one?
Frank, I do think that the East does have a chance for 2 Pool C teams. I think that the table is set in these East rankings for some upward movement, particularly of the Liberty League teams. Like I said, if Union gets to 10-0 and Wesley's criteria fall a little bit, with Endicott not being a ranked team and with their SOS coming down, I think you can see Union, if they get all the way to 10-0, climb up to number 2 in the rankings. And that's going to pull Ithaca up with them. Ithaca, if they win the Cortica Jug game, they're going to get a strength of schedule boost at the end as well. I know who's Ithaca's game this week?
RPI, who's 5-3.
RPI's okay. So Ithaca's going to get a little bit of a strength of schedule boost as well. I think there is a decent chance that Hobart ends up in the rankings at some point if they can complete their season undefeated, or not undefeated, but win their last 2 games, which will give Ithaca a ranked result. And then you're going to have a really tough decision in the East region, what to do with Ithaca versus Wesley. If you're that regional committee, you want to set the table to maximize your chances for multiple bids. Do you go Ithaca and then Wesley and let Wesley, sort of be last in, first out kind of team, or do you want to do that with Ithaca? I think those profiles are going to be fairly similar, and I think that the East region is going to have a difficult decision in the end on how to rank those teams. I do think that at least one of them will get in. Whoever's ranked higher in the end, I think goes in. And then I think that the one that is second on that list is going to be right there on the bubble.
Guys, before we close out here, I want to go through the regional rankings one more time with the viewers and go through with them all on the screen. Number 1, Salisbury, decent strength of schedule, very decent regionally ranked opponents record of now 2-0 with Oshkosh. Number 2, Wesley, 577 strength of schedule. They lose a regionally ranked team compared to last week. It's now 1-1. Which is reasonably okay. It sort of justifies the strength of schedule number. Remember, if you have multiple regionally ranked opponents, you probably have a very good strength of schedule as well. Those seem to validate each other, but they shouldn't be double counted by the committee in certain ways. They should be used for validation more than anything else, and then actually look at who they beat inside that to determine whether or not it's meaningful. In this case, Wesley beat Delaware Valley, the number 3 team in the East, and they lost to number 1, Salisbury, so that's why they're looked at strongly. Number 3, Delaware Valley with 536 and 1-1 record. Wilkes being the other team, so they beat number 10, lost to number 2. Union, 487. They beat number 6, Ithaca. Western New England, 532. No results against regionally ranked opponents now. Ithaca, 520. The loss to number 4, Union. Brockport, 539. The win versus number 8, Cortland. Still don't believe how they did it. 32-26 in overtime on Saturday. Number 8, Cortland, 504 with 0-1, a loss to number 7, Brockport. Number 9, WPI, the head scratcher of sorts, 457, 0-0. And Wilkes, though, another head scratcher of sorts, 437 with 0-1, the loss to number 3, Delaware Valley. Greg, give you the first shot here on closing thoughts. Do you think we're going to see some adjustments despite not many games that we can pinpoint that should be really good, exciting games inside the rankings this coming week? What's your view of what might change despite a lack of losses?
I think one thing that might change is that if you look at the data sheets that the NCAA puts out, they do not have any data for ranked opponents this week, which indicates to me that they didn't strongly consider data from teams against other ranked opponents. When you start to factor those results in next week, in next week's rankings, then you're going to see teams like Hobart and Endicott and possibly even Framingham get some boost from having results against ranked opponents. You might see some adjustment with Wesley and Delaware Valley and Union and that cluster of teams there when they consider the whole of the criteria and not excluding the ranked opponents, the results against ranked opponents.
JB, your thoughts?
Well, the thing that I think is going to get interesting near the end is when we might come into some type of horse trading, you can say. There's only two undefeated teams in the East. There's two in the North. There is four apparently in the South, and then there's three in the West, including one not too far down the road from where Greg is in Southern California with Chapman down in Orange County. So we could see some possibilities. I mentioned on the show a couple weeks back that in 2012 there was not an East Region number one seeded team. There was no like East pod or anchor, you can say. And so it makes you have to wonder about teams like maybe Muhlenberg from the Centennial, which is pretty close to the East Region. Salisbury's in Maryland. Could they be potentially paired up with, say, a Mary Hardin Baylor down in the South? So all these kinds of things, gets tricky. Ultimately, they're looking for the top 8 teams. I think we kind of know who those top 8 teams, if you kind of look through the regions, but how you sort of mix and match them, particularly, that the 500-mile rule is something that new D3 fans may not be familiar with, but it definitely has a big impact on this, especially since it looks like we're going to have an undefeated team from California, which is going to have to get on an airplane at some point, or maybe even host a game, and someone's going to have to fly out to LA for that kind of a thing. So these types of things, get a little tricky. But to Greg's point, it's when we started looking at different matchups and who's played who, and I think this will shake out. But this was kind of a little bit of a curveball to start things off. We'll see if things try to rotate back to what we've seen the last couple of years, or if it's just going to be kind of a little bit of a wild card type of situation, and then we'll all be kind of scratching our heads. I guess we'll see.
Indeed. Folks that are watching this live, again, this will be integrated into our host chat show later on today. Not too much later on today, however. For those watching in host chat, we remind you that we'll be back on Friday with Lightning Picks live around 11 a.m. on Friday morning. And at that point, I'll finally figure out to do my quick hits for you, Greg, so you can get those posted forthwith. I usually get the ping right after we go off on our live show. I think Greg watches it. He doesn't let us know that, but he watches our live picks show. But we will be back Friday with those. And then Saturday, we are working on getting in the East Region Blitzer again for some big games in the East. The whip around. We're practicing for first round of the playoffs, which we should be doing again this year as long as the NCAA and Turner give us permission. Yes. So be prepared for that. Greg, maybe you can help us out a little bit with some commentary on that show as well on Saturday live, probably starting around noontime or just before noontime Eastern time, 9 a.m. Pacific for those of you that may be out there.
Get your coffee.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, folks, for joining us. Thank you, Greg, as always, and we will talk to y'all soon.